Well, it appears that it wouldn't hurt to just keep reviewing it again and again and again that I'm working on. In chapter 2, verse 14, we have this change of direction from Paul's directly talking about the circumstances of his relationship with the Corinthians, circumstances that were a bit wobbly. Maybe that's where the zoo was. And then he begins to think, thanks be to God who leads us in triumphal procession, who reveals, makes clear, manifests the aroma of Christ through us. And he then moves on into New Covenant language and reflects.
Bless you.
Sorry. I think I'm allergic to Kansas City right now.
Eyes are burning today.
Yeah. He moves into the New Covenant ministry in chapter 3, talks about the glory of the Lord being veiled, surpassing glory of the New Covenant. We all with unveiled faces are being transformed into the same glory from one degree of glory to another or from glory to glory. Moves on into chapter 4, and we've been in chapter 4 for a number of weeks now. We have this treasure in earthen vessels, in order the surpassing greatness of the power may be of God and not of ourselves. And then this sort of series of contrasts. In every way, we're pressured but not crushed, stressed but not stressed out, to use my peculiar paraphrase of it. What's the next one? Persecuted but not abandoned, knocked down but not knocked out, to use J.B. Phillips' paraphrase of the last of those little pairs. Always carrying in our bodies the dying of Jesus, in order that the life of Jesus, the resurrection life of Jesus, might be manifest or clear or revealed in our mortal bodies. I was thinking about that yesterday afternoon, preparing this lesson, wondering what sort of moved Paul's mind in the sort of train of thought that he is undergoing. And obviously there's a sense we'll never know. There's all kinds of stuff we don't know about him and his thoughts and his experiences. My mind went back to chapter 1, verse 8, which I reference here, where he talks about an infliction or a pressure in Asia that was so unbearably severe that he despaired even of life itself. And we speculated some things it might have been or might not have been. But it appears that that's that kind of, he's come face to face with death. And so as he thinks about the pressures of ministry and the pressures of life, he always contextualizes them in light of that larger hope. There's something more important for him than having a good day or being happy. There is the ongoingness of his calling and his commitment, the work of Christ in the world, the hope that he has. Doug mentioned in his prayer that hope that we have because of the resurrection. That seems to just sort of be in Paul in all kinds of places, pushing him forward and driving him. And it becomes clear, he starts to talk then about eternal realities as opposed to, and I'm not sure what to call it, because none of the things opposed to eternal realities really befit reality. Physical, earthly experiences that we have. And he seems to think that the eternal realities are more real than the what we call real life kinds of stuff, which is going to lead him on into a train of thought that we'll explore some today. We started in the paragraph 16 to 18 of chapter 4 2 weeks ago, and I think talked through verse 16, and so would someone read verses 16 to 18 once again, and then we will pick up with verse 17.
So we do not lose heart, even though our outer nature is wasting away. Our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For this slight momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all measure. Because we look not at what can be seen, but what cannot be seen. For what can be seen is temporary, but what cannot be seen is eternal.
Okay, take a look at verse 17. In this translation, for the slight momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all measure. What's the kernel sentence? What's the subject, verb, predicate? Subject,
Slight momentary affliction.
That's what I was thinking.
okay, which means slight and momentary are adjectives, and affliction would be the subject in this particular translation. Okay, what's happening with this affliction?
Prepared.
Preparing us.
Preparing.
Is preparing.
Mine says producing.
Okay, we'll work at the verb momentarily. And what is it producing or preparing for us?
Eternal glory.
Eternal weight of glory. So I want you to have that sense of flow. Now, some of you are accustomed to my fussiness about translations.
Yeah.
In the Greek text, the the subject is not affliction, but lightness.
Lightness.
Lightness, the
Light.
momentary lightness of our affliction.
Light as in not weight.
Not weighty, yeah, not heavy. The small matter of.
From he who is in prison and stoned to almost death, etc.
I was going to say, when you look at that, him saying slight momentary affliction, and we don't understand that it could have been a really big deal.
It was.
But he's saying in comparison to the weight of glory, it's not a big deal. But
How does he
if we
know?
were in prison or been beaten up or whatever, we'd think that's a pretty big deal.
We would be
Yeah.
total
Yeah.
We would
wussies.
be whining.
Whining.
Went to this.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
They stoned him. No.
Does he deny the reality of affliction?
No,
No.
but he does kind of limit.
But he minimizes it in some ways. Nevertheless, the lightness of it, interestingly enough, the lightness of it is doing something. And what is it doing? Preparing or producing, or the Greek word might even be bringing about, working out to completion, an eternal weight of glory. So that I think it's fair to say, Paul sees a benefit of the affliction. He sees a benefit that he perceives it as slight or momentary, light. The momentary lightness of our affliction, it's producing something that's in his mind a good thing. It's in a certain sense picking up on the theme that we saw back in verse 7. We have this treasure in earthen vessels in order that the surpassing glory might be of God and not of ourselves. Nancy.
It just occurred to me. I was reading, now I can't remember where it is. I've got to start remembering where it is. He talks about deaths, many, at one point. How
Yes.
many deaths? There's an S on it.
Oh, yeah?
And I'm wondering what the one time when he was dragged out of the city for dead, that period. I mean, do we know when the first time that happened to him would be?
When?
No.
Obviously, there was another one, since there was an S on it.
All we know is what you're referencing is in last part of 13, first part of chapter 14 of Acts, where he's stoned and left for dead.
It's Acts? I thought it
I
was
thought it was like Galatians.
one further down the list.
Where he's stoned and left for dead, you can
Right.
find a story of that at the end of Acts 13, the beginning of Acts 14, one of those. Lystra, Iconium, Derbe, one of those little towns he went through.
But he's in Ephesus when he's writing this, right?
This is sometime later.
And so this is.
And
something
now
about
we've
10
also,
years later,
the
maybe?
despairing of death that we have that he mentions at the beginning of this chapter. So yeah, there's,
So he's had some experience with this before.
he's had some near-death experiences, which he doesn't seem to talk about the same way we talk about them nowadays. They seem to be, though, indicators to him of something eternal and something important. You know.
Can
Yeah.
I ask if anybody else in here has ever had a near-death experience that could tell us about it? They're not admitting it.
Oh.
Well,
Whoever
I was
might.
like, that's gonna be an interesting question, let me see.
Well, I just like to make it
I
personal.
know, let's look around.
Depending on what your
If
experience
anybody does,
was.
let us know, okay?
All of this momentary is in contrast to what?
Eternal.
Eternal. Lightness, which is in contrast to
Weightiness.
weight. And affliction, which is in contrast to
Glory.
glory, apparently. Those are the, if you want to set up the kind of parallels, the affliction and the glory are the sort of oddballs. There is a tad of play on words. Most scholars think there's intentional or unintentional pun on Paul's part. The word glory in Hebrew is, one of the words is kabod,
Huge.
which also means heavy. Because that which is glorious is splendid and wealthy is what? Wealthy is heavy, because wealthy means you have money, and money is weighed in the ancient world and not counted as much. It's weighed out. So there's an eternal weight, eternal weight of heaviness. And it's the heaviness, apparently in the context of this book, it's the heaviness of the presence of God. So this momentary lightness of our affliction is bringing us to, it's producing, it is working out for us an eternal weight, there's substance there, of the heaviness, of the reality of the presence of God in our lives.
Oh, I want that.
All you need is a little momentary slight affliction.
That's right. Be careful what you
Now,
do.
somebody asked, maybe it was Jenny, how does he know this? Actually, that's my question a little bit later in the lesson, but how do you know anything about things unseen?
Somehow you have to have either like an experience like this or some kind of revelation that God just downloads information into you. I don't know.
And activates it. Has to activate it with faith.
Some of you believe in resurrection hope. How do you know that you should do that?
By faith.
Okay. We have evidences in the resurrection of Jesus. We have teachings in the teaching of the apostles. And all of those things become no proofs, but sort of signposts or indicators that invite us to trust, invite us to believe. And the evidence that we believe is not that we say so, but that we start to live in a certain way consistent with that reality. Jenny.
And our own testimony. Our testimonies are huge and powerful.
And
Mine is.
that becomes, in some sense,
Okay.
scripturally, more important for other people than for you.
Right.
And it's their testimonies that become important for you, rather than, well, I say it, so it must be true, which is certainly a modern way of thinking, but I don't think a biblical way. Yeah. Marcia.
Why does he say that this momentary affliction is preparing us for the weight of glory? In the first place, I don't know what the affliction has to do with the glory, and I'm not sure if the glory is the presence as you're talking about, or if it's talking about eternal life with Christ. I don't really know what he means by that. But what does the affliction do to prepare us? Just to keep us faithful? Is that the idea?
I think back to verse 7. This exists so that the surpassing glory might be of, power might be of God and not of ourselves. A part of what Paul experiences in his affliction is the discovery that he is not sufficient in and of himself. And you'll remember that's been a question in this theological reflection section. Who is adequate? Who is sufficient for these things? Not that we are sufficient of these things for ourselves. Our sufficiency is from God who makes us sufficient. And in Paul's mind, one of the ways God makes you sufficient, one of the ways God makes you adequate is through afflictions.
To prove you?
Absolutely, I hate that.
Maybe.
They're horrible.
Or maybe just to help you understand this is not about me and I'm not capable of managing this.
But I'm still expected to be faithful.
Yeah. Now, pour into this recipe that you're stirring around right now. 1 Corinthians 10:13, he will not test you beyond what you're able to bear. So that describes the affliction in what terms? There's a lightness to it. There's a momentary character to it because it doesn't totally overwhelm you. We are afflicted but not crushed, he says in verse 8. Stressed but not stressed out. Now, is this heaven already? Some people think so. I'm not sure where the transition, I don't know if we're going to get there. I think we get there in the next paragraph, and where the transition happens between just the presence of God now and the reality of heaven, presumably later. How are those two related to each other? Is heaven about streets of gold and mansions, or is heaven about the reality of the presence of God in full measure without impediment?
B, that may be
Yeah.
useful.
Which he will actually get around to by verse 5 of chapter 5, I think. And so we'll try to keep cycling. Okay?
Can I give an example?
I don't know. Let me see.
Well,
Personal experience.
when I give my testimony, it's really great and I feel good, but I have to live with that testimony. So I don't feel good about myself a lot of the time because it's, I led a creepy life. But and it wasn't even that bad comparatively. It's just that I have my conscience always bothers me. But in that, God teaches me, remember what I told you to do when you were a kid. Help me to forgive myself. Help me to forgive myself. So I, get in there. But without him helping me even live this life, and then it's all for the testimony, and I said, what, and I'll say, what good am I? Because of that. I'll just say, what good is it? And he said, well, you pray. I felt him say that. Well, you pray.
Consolation.
And that made me laugh because because I am grateful for my sense of humor. So that affliction is always there. Without him, I couldn't be alive. I couldn't be alive today. So I am afflicted but not crushed because I know that my testimony will help other people, does help, has helped other people. And they're the ones I'm concerned about. That's all there is to it. So if I have to be afflicted like this, I will live this way. And he will get me through it.
You might think of what good you are in terms of Romans 6:13, where Paul commands his readers to not present their members, their body parts, our hands and feet and eyes and mouth and etc., to no longer present our members to sin as instruments, and the Greek could also be translated as weapons of wickedness, but present yourselves to God as those who've been brought from death to life, and present your members, who you are, what you got, to God as instruments or weapons of righteousness. So that it's a way of saying that God works with, or even God does battle with evil through you, and you, and you. And for one, it may be what you say, and another, it may be what you put your hand to do, and for another, it may be where you go. And so the instrumentality of, or the weapon character of what we bring to the table is not necessarily identical from person to person to person, but its unity, its commonality, is that it's an instrument or a weapon in the hand of God. And Paul will actually circle around to that in a later chapter of 2 Corinthians, and right now I can't remember which chapter it
You
is.
should write an article about that and put it
Roger,
online.
I like to think of it as boot camp.
Boot camp.
Right, we all go to a different boot camp, but it's boot camp.
Life, our life
Yeah,
is boot camp.
right, and it prepares us to be tougher and not cave in.
And there's actually some language in Romans 7 that would sort of be consistent with that too, of beachheads, battlegrounds kind of stuff, that sin tries to establish a beachhead in our lives, in our flesh, etc. Okay?
Does God, or does Paul assume that it is God who does the afflicting?
I don't think so.
You sure doesn't stop?
I think he assumes God uses all those things.
Yeah, so that goes good.
Because we look not at what can be seen, but at what cannot be seen. What can be seen is temporary. What cannot be seen is eternal.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Look at verse 18 and note the connection from 17 to 18. How would you describe the flow from 17 to 18? The momentary lightness of our affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all measure, because we are looking not at what can be seen, but what cannot be seen.
The afflictions can be seen. Afflictions
felt.
can be seen.
Yeah. What would it do to your read of this if instead of the word because, you had the word if?
Yeah, oh. Okay.
You know, mine
Well,
says.
actually, I'd be happy if there was some content with that. Oh, wow! What changes? What comes about if the word if is the word instead of because?
You know, New American has while we look.
That's a possibility too.
Because we have to absolutely keep our eyes on Jesus.
Rick?
Well, for me, I always come back to this word of perspective, how you see this in context of the whole picture. When he talks about affliction, I think of it in terms of that passage that says, consider hardship as discipline. God disciplines every son, and so all of these go together and say, this is preparing us as children of God to live eternally in this way of glory. So the perspective is, if I think of the long term, if I think of the eternal, then all of this becomes less important. Not less painful, but less important
Okay.
in my life.
Yeah. Which is probably not to say small moments are not very significant moments. But on the whole, in the light of eternity, a moment of affliction now is a minor matter in the total picture. The idea, if it's if instead of because,
It's causatory.
would suggest that there's responsibility on us
Right.
to look at the things that are not seen rather than things that are seen.
We have a responsibility there.
The Greek construction has the possibility to be taken while, or because, or even though, or if, or in order that. And a part of the interpretive process is trying to figure out which of those transition words catches the sense of this best. I first heard, just for you First Church people, I first heard, at least to make it stick in my brain, of the if possibility in a revival service here at First Church with Michael Benson, the preacher. So it's probably 15 or more years ago.
Oh my God.
And I don't know, he may have had a version that had provided we look at the things. That's a different way than the while or the because way of connecting the verse. Okay? Anything else out of verse 18 that strikes you as of particular importance?
Well, he again mentions the temporary and eternal
Uh-huh.
references.
Yeah. And connects visibility to that issue too. That which is temporary is
Seen.
visible. That which is eternal is invisible. And we have a major temptation to want to think what's visible is most real,
Yeah.
and he's undermining that. Elbow, and then Gigi.
We also like to believe that the body is going to be resurrected. We believe that the physical world is going to be redeemed. So what we see eventually is eternal. Our bodies are eternal, which reminds me of a discussion in Times Square class about 30 years ago. A guy who's now
It's before I was born.
a professor in a theological seminary got quite agitated that when this verse was quoted. Oh, no. What we see, our bodies, the physical world is eternal.
form of
So
it.
I need a little enlightenment. I've been thinking about it for 30 years or so.
So who was the professor
Yeah.
of what seminary?
And then,
Well, it's one
Mr.
of
T.
your professors.
That was Mr. T. Um,
It's a form.
I think,
It's a form of that.
and not knowing where that person was coming from exactly. Is certs a Candyman or a breath mint? And the answer is yes. In the way that we look at things from the perspective of this world, what is seen is temporary. And we assume in this world that what's unseen is eternal. From the perspective of eternity, what is seen is both temporary and eternal. Because the body, even as we know it, well, back to 1 Corinthians, we will be changed. So our bodily existence in terms of resurrection hope, yes. In that sense, something visible is eternal. And we don't know what our resurrection bodies will look like. Most of us are hopeful.
But will be recognized.
That it'll be different than what we experienced in
Maybe you have to look back at your high school pictures to
When I
recognize.
was 12.
I get caught with my new boss in some interesting expectations, and she came back from some trip around the world exhausted. So we've got to get this thing together. We've got some donors coming on April 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and I need a keynote paper, and I'm afraid to ask this faculty and this faculty because they'll say no, and she knew I would say, well, I guess I could do that. A theology of sexuality. And so I spent most of my time in Genesis 1 and 2 and actually used a sermon that I preached here about 1.5 years ago as a part of the ending too. But the helper, partner, all that sort of stuff. But as I was reflecting on verse 25 of Genesis 2, they were both naked and not ashamed. And it's one of those thoughts that you've seen happen to me that it's not in my manuscript or I haven't thought it, it just pops out as this is evidence that Adam and Eve, or the man and the woman, were in their 20s when they were created. Otherwise, they'd have been ashamed. They were naked. So I hope our resurrection body is something like the 20s instead of like where I am now. The analogy that we work with a little bit is that of Jesus' resurrection body, which has enough similarity to be recognizable. They know who he is most of the time, although not always. They see scars, but there's also features of it that are different. And so the seen, visible resurrection body, I would say, yeah, that's eternal. Is that the exact same as this one? I hope not. And the analogy is probably not. Yeah, Gigi, and then Doug.
Well, you had asked, what else do we see in verse 18? And I was thinking it's more about a sense of influence. What are we allowing to influence our life and decisions? Do I hold the things that I'm dealing with on an earthly basis as what's in front of me? Do I allow that to influence, or do I allow the beyond kind of ideas and the hope to influence my life?
I don't know if you'll let me, well, you don't have a choice, I'm going to do it, but if you would agree. What I'm hearing from that is, another way of saying that is, where do I find reality? The defining realities of my life. Are they in the things that are seen, in the things that are here? Is this,
Well, it's not that
this-
it's not that this is not real, but
it's not ultimate.
right. I have to make a choice to allow the eternal things to have a greater influence on my choices and decisions.
That they become the ultimate reality out of which I live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
I think that's what he's trying to
I think
communicate.
that's hard to
It's
do.
hard.
I think that it's so much
She'll
easier for
learn.
us to depend and to value things we can see rather than try to value something we can't see.
Yeah.
That's hard.
It is hard.
Another way of putting it is that this is Philippians now, we're citizens of a different kingdom. Not the kingdom of this world, but our citizenship is from heaven, he says in Philippians 3:20. The kingdom of God is a commonwealth different than any of us are citizens of on this planet.
Roger,
Okay.
don't you think that what you see when you pay close attention to Paul is that that's how he lives? I mean, he's living in both places.
Yeah. Which some of you remember when we did the diagram of the overlap of the ages. He lives in the overlap. I think we do too. And the question becomes, which of those two ages has a future that I want to commit myself to? Doug, I think you were in the queue.
Yeah, in verse 18, I'm kind of wondering about that phrase, what cannot be seen. That's what we are, in addition to looking at what can be seen, which of course we have to do, that we're also supposed to be looking at what cannot be seen.
Which is a funny play on words, isn't it?
It is, so I'm assuming it's metaphor at some point. But I'm wondering, okay, so what, for Paul, if Paul were to be asked, okay, Paul, could you give us like examples of 5 things that cannot be seen that we are to look at? What might those be?
I'm glad you're not asking me that question. Go ahead, Paul.
So, Paul, since you're Paul's surrogate,
Paul?
I mean, I can think of some things in my life that are not seen that I try to pay attention to. But I'm wondering kind of what Paul has in. Do we have clues here, even in the text, of what Paul has in mind of things that we can actually attend to that can't be seen?
I think where he's headed is what we would call resurrection hope. In somewhere in chapter 5, verse 3, give or take a little bit. I think out of 1 Corinthians 13, now abide faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love, which might then mean faith and hope would be in that picture sort of too. I think I don't know about this, whether he thinks the risen Lord is now visible or not visible. Have I not seen the Lord? The Damascus Road experience, is that the last appearance of the risen Jesus? Were there others that we don't know? So I'm not sure about that one. But I think in the context would be certainly our hope of resurrection. I think what we've been sort of wrestling with here of the idea that the temporariness and the lightness of affliction produces eternal weight of glory, that is something not seen. Let me just mention too, the word look at in this translation is a different Greek word than the others about seeing. This is the word from which we get scope. To scope out, telescope, that kind of.
So it's
And-
not
and
like
So
so-
what did you say it was again?
Scope.
Scope.
The root
Is this
from which we get the word
because
scope.
we look not at, is that the
Yeah,
same
the
word?
look. The look. So I think, thinking in terms of scope, maybe you could translate it as focus.
How about reflect, is it?
No, I don't think so. He had that vocabulary and he used that in chapter 3.
Okay.
Yeah. So we focus on the things that are
Oh, I see.
not seen. So it has to do, I think, with attention, commitment. Not that there's actually
I think
something that happens in the back of your eyeballs on things that are invisible, but if you want to say metaphor as you did, it's the metaphor of focusing. Renee?
Could it also be that, like in Revelations, where it says that we will not have any need for moon or sun, that the Lord light
The
will
light.
be the light?
Mm-hmm.
This is something we're not familiar with in this earthly life, and so we know the light because of the
Shekinah.
Shekinah?
Shekinah.
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 Shekinah, that's how you say it. Say it again, please.
Shekinah.
S-H-E-K.
I learned from a pilot that every cloud leaves a shadow, no shadow. So that's kind of light we're gonna see, but it's just a preeminent.
Which may be a way of saying
Fire.
there's reality there beyond our capacity to imagine.
Right, and that same cloud was the fire at night because the shadows had come from the darkness. And so, but there was no shadow in that cloud. It didn't leave a shadow on the ground because it's all light. And so that gave me a whole new perspective of that. And I didn't even realize that. I thought a cloud, like you see a cloud in the rain, when it's gonna rain. But so it's a whole different thing to look at.
Eye has not seen, has not entered into the ear what God has prepared for us. Yeah. It's somewhere between Isaiah quotation and in 2 Corinthians or 1 Corinthians 2. So let's look at verses 1 to 5 of chapter 5.
For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this tent we groan, longing to be clothed with our heavenly dwelling. If indeed, when we have taken it off, we will not be found naked. For while we are still in this tent, we groan under our burden, because we wish not to be unclothed, but to be further clothed, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. He who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who has given us the Spirit as a guarantee.
Any questions? Okay, let's go on. So how does this relate to the previous paragraph, verses 16 to 18 of chapter 4?
It has to do with what is temporary, what is not, but it was eternal.
Okay?
Our earthly body, our earthly life is in this earthly tent.
Okay?
And when it falls destroyed, we have a better life with God.
Okay.
A house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens.
So we worked on this once already, but here was where I was going to ask, how does he say we know?
It's faith.
Yeah, he knows by the apprehension of faith, the grasping of faith. He doesn't know by experience yet. He doesn't know by senses. He knows by community. And we live in an era of history in which the way knowledge is adjudicated has been pushed into public and private domains. And public knowledge is not debatable. 2 plus 2, nobody fights about that. Knowing that God exists, that's personal, that's private knowledge, which is not the division of knowledges that Paul worked in. But he works out of a knowledge that arises from the community versus the knowledge that is his own personal experience, which he hasn't had this yet. Now, he says the earthly tent we live in, or the earthly house of our tent is the Greek. But what does he mean by our earthly house of the tent is being destroyed?
We're wasting away, as he said,
Getting old.
ourselves.
Evidence of
Aging.
that.
Back to looking in the mirror, huh?
It's physical.
Tent suggests what?
Temporary.
Temporariness, yeah. Less secure, more fragile than a stone house, okay? Earthly suggests. Well, probably a combination of part of this age and this era, and also to some sense temporary too. The famous parable of Jesus that most of us only know through the children's song. The wise man built his house upon the rock. The foolish man built his house on the sand. The foolish man built his house with earthly kinds of resources. Something that doesn't last. Okay, so we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, is there the possibility that it won't be?
No, really.
Jesus returns, some people are going to skip the destruction.
Yeah,
But they'll be changed though, too.
yeah. But the earthly tent
Would be changed.
won't be destroyed; it'll just be
Just-
transformed.
yeah.
What he appears to reflect is, we die and our bodies decompose. So suppose that happens. Most of us are assuming it probably will. What happens to us?
We're swallowed up by life, he says here.
Eventually.
He doesn't say that eventually.
No, in verse 4, but in verse 1, what does he say? In contrast to the earthly house of our tent,
Oh, we have a,
Building house.
We have a
we have
better
a
house.
building, and you can probably translate, we have a construction from God.
That's construction is the root of that word, building.
Edifice would be another way to describe it.
It reminds you of a
it-
stone building like.
Yeah, it's
like
a constructed thing,
temple was.
a
Okay, so
constructed
it's the
house.
thing he's talking about, not
Yeah.
the process.
Opposite.
Right, it's not the process of construction, it's the result of the construction, in other words, the construction, this building, is
So it's like the
construction.
opposite of a tent.
The point being, who does the constructing?
God.
God. And it's a house not made by hands,
But eternal.
and it's eternal, and it's in the heavens, or of the heavens, perhaps.
Sounds more permanent than a tent.
It does, because the things that are not seen are what are eternal, not the things that are seen in the verse before. Yeah. So for in this tent we
We grow.
grow.
Oh.
Why?
Passing away. Because we're
It's
deteriorating.
hard.
Those are the burdens.
It hurts to be in this tent when you get old. Yeah. It's interesting too. I mean, see, if groaning is a word he seems to have some affinity for.
Maybe he's done a lot of
I
that.
can't imagine.
Things are flexible.
I think he groaned when he was stoned.
I consider that the sufferings, this is Romans 8, starting in 18, the sufferings of this present time, Al will refer to this, I think, are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it in hope. Or in hope that the creation itself would be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now, and not only creation, we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit, connect that to verse 5 of 2 Corinthians 5, where it's not first fruits but the down payment, the first payment. We groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we ought, but that very Spirit intercedes with, and the Greek is groans again, too deep for words. So groaning is a way that Paul understands life in this world.
Didn't you say that the earth groaned at the fall of Adam and Eve?
Yeah.
Isn't that
Uh,
part of Genesis there, that the earth groaned?
It's not in the Genesis account. It may be in a psalm or some other account that's describing poetically, referencing back to it. Yeah.
So this word groan is also a form of intercession from the Holy
It
Spirit.
doesn't have to be. It's, I think, mostly the sense of feelings that you can't capture with words. Words fail us.
To describe it.
Not good, not good.
But you can't just sit in silence either.
Whining.
And if you have had kids or are married, everybody groans differently. Groaning is an individual sort of expression, and your spouse's groan is a different sound than yours, and your kids all have different kinds of groans. I never was good enough, but 2 doors down the hall, Dorothy could hear a child groan and know which one it was. Why do we groan?
So it's heavy.
Because we long to be clothed with our heavenly dwelling and out of this temporary tent.
We groan in anticipation of what is to be, and hoping, longing for that transition. which is a lousy place to stop. On the other hand, a marvelous place to stop. Yeah. There is hope for us in our groaning. And Paul will work on that in the rest of this paragraph and draw some more conclusions from it in the next paragraph. And he'll get back to what we do with each other in our ministry by the end of the chapter. Father, thank you for your word. It points us to places we have not seen, places we anticipate but cannot describe with assurance or controlling confidence. Teach us to know, because we know you, that these are good things that we anticipate and that your grace is sufficient. Not necessarily to answer our questions, but to enable us to find fulfillment and meaning and joy in the unfolding hope that Paul begins to place before us. I pray as we celebrate Easter in this season of the year, that the hope of the significance of Easter for our own lives as victory over sin and over death, that you might paint in our imaginations and hope a vision of what you can do for us in the world in which we live. In Christ's name and for his sake we pray. Amen. Thank you. Have a good week.
Thank you.